I think epistemology, or the understanding of knowledge itself, is preceded by what is knowledge, right? So I am more so interested in the fundamental axioms of what even forms knowledge in the first place. What does it mean to even know? You can, see, if I have to go on to read scientific studies on particular things and I have to understand how the world works, there is like endless amount of information on that. But every single time I go in to do that, I see that they have a specific criteria, and the first question that I always end up asking is, okay, how is that criteria formed? And according to what I have understood, at least, it's the fact that there are certain fundamental assumptions that you make after observing reality. Then you make a logically consistent system out of it. That is what we call logic and math, set theory. And on the basis of that, we apply it to physical phenomena or physical reality that we see, right? The natural sciences of sorts. And you keep going until you reach more of soft sciences, psychology, and everything. So everything at the end of the day originates from the point of assumption. You make an assumption about reality, and then whether or not it is useful, that determines if that is true or not. Perhaps science will fail at certain points. I think we are actually failing in certain things, right? That is the reason something as large of a logical leap as multiverse theory exists. It's because at certain points mathematics simply fails. So instead of going back and seeing what were the fundamental assumptions that we took in set theory, perhaps that made it so that we are making a mistake here. Now we are just using science as dogmatic religion because, okay, this can't be wrong. So far it has helped us, so this can't be wrong. Now let's make assumptions about reality on the basis of that. So that is where I somehow find science hypocritical in a certain sense, and therefore I'm more interested in how even the process of knowing is formed. And that is why my recent interest in certain religious paths, specifically Kashmiri Shaivism, because I think their understanding, or Hinduism in general, has just one understanding, that the only thing which is real is the process of observation. Everything else is something that you've inferred.
Yeah, well, I'm not a scientist, cosmologist, so I can't really speak on the multiverse theory or hypothesis or how they came up with it or why or anything like that. It's one idea of many different ideas in cosmology. And whether or not the model turns out to be predictive or not will be whether or not it's accepted in science, because it's, as far as I understand, it's one hypothesis. It's not necessarily even a theory as such, because it doesn't necessarily have the explanatory power that other cosmological models have right now. It listening to, as I have scientists talk about cosmology, it seems that string theory is pretty much the way they're kind of headed as the way to understand the universe. And it's also way above my head, and it's like, okay guys, you said words, all right, keep doing that, whatever you're doing, you guys figure it out, let me know, and I'm fine with the mystery. I don't need to know how it all works. I'm happy to I'd love to know, but I don't know, so that's fine, and I'll let the smart people figure it out eventually, if we can figure it out. And until then, well, I don't know, that's fine. But as far as whether or not it's based on an assumption to start with, I don't know if that's relevant or not. We go, okay, well, how does this thing work? Like, you have a door behind you of some sort, and well, we suspect that the handle will go up and down because that's what those type of handles do. But as for all I know, that handle might just be painted on there, and it's an optical illusion, and it's whatever. And so, well, there's certain behaviors I can expect about reality that might turn out to not be correct because I was incorrect about my observation. But if I was allowed to test it, then I would see, okay, it does indeed, crank just like every other handle that looks like that does. And, so the testability of the phenomenon that I observe allows me to know more about it. Whereas when you're dealing with something ethereal, spiritual, God, that sort of supernatural realm, the testability and the observation all go kind of out the window. And I there's a reason for that, but I'm wondering why you think that what do you think of any of that?
Yeah, so the way that I understand it, it's a abductive reasoning argument always. It's the best explanation argument. I mean, even in string theory, from what I understand, their equations broke after a certain point, right? Math was not mathing in the things that they were observing. So they assumed, as using abductive reasoning, they assumed certain extra dimensions. And once they were able to assume that, now in that assumption, their equations started working again. And that is the reason I think they have like 26 dimension in string theory. It's all an assumption at the end of the day. And the reason they're making those assumptions is because it is the best plausible explanation they can come up with right now. So I think I sort of made this on my whiteboard also. So the way that I understand all the three sorts of reasoning is this. Deductive reasoning is a car, right? It takes you to short distances. It's very precise. It can take you from house to house. That is what it can do. And it is very accurate also. It gets you across. That is the reason people prefer deductive reasoning. Then there is inductive reasoning, which is based on patterns, right? If triangle, square, they're repeating, and you stop at square, what is the next thing that is going to come? You're going to assume it's a triangle. That is inductive reasoning. It's like a train. It's not as precise, but it is decent enough. It takes you to a longer distance, right? You don't have to do deductive reasoning. And now abductive reasoning is like, if all I witness in the world is triangles and squares, I'm going to assume that there are no curvature possible. There are no circles in this world. And that is just the best explanation possible for the event. So it is like a airplane. It's very fast. It takes you from countries to countries, but it cannot even be as accurate as a train, right? Airports are usually very farther away from the city. So if you have to reach truth, which is very close to you, right? If you already have the premises laid, you just have to take one more step, you'll use deductive reasoning. If you have to reach truth, which is quite far away, you're going to first use inductive reasoning, then use deductive reasoning and reach the truth. And ultimately for truth, something like God, which is like beyond the scope of the universe, you have to understand that. You have to start with abductive reasoning every single time. Then you have to do inductive reasoning. Then you go into deductive reasoning, and then you reach the truth. What most people do is they use an abductive reasoning, and you don't exactly quite reach the truth, but you are in the ballpark of the truth. And then they claim that XYZ thing is completely proven. It is not logically accurate, but it is still the best explanation possible. And almost, I mean, not exactly there, but they're using the same methodology that even scientists use, because it is a valid form of reasoning.
Well, I think that if I was to have an analogy of sticking with transportation, I would say that my method that I'm utilizing is a wormhole that is instantaneous, because you immediately get to whether or not you should or shouldn't accept the idea, and it's very simple to use. And not only is it simple to use, but it can be demonstrated to work, and has been demonstrated to work every single time so far. And well, that's why you're skeptical. That's why you don't just believe, you test. Yeah. And that method is essentially what's called informal logic, as opposed to formal logic, which is its own thing. But informal logic deals with natural language, which is, well, any and every language we have is essentially a natural one. And using the ideas that are in formal logic, A is B, B is C, therefore A is C. Okay, so there's a nice little formula, but what the bleep is A and B? What are you talking about? It's just all variables, So once you make it into the talking about something real, then that's informal logic. So Socrates was if Socrates is sorry. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So you have some, you have something actually real that you're talking about, rather than just saying A, B, B, C. You're talking about something concrete and real, and that's informal logic. And so you say, well, if I identify a logical fallacy, then whoever wrote that argument, whoever said the argument, has basically done the math wrong, if you will. And so now we can't say that it's not true, because that's not what logic does. It just says your argument sucked, now we don't believe it, and that's it. Go fix your argument, come back, and then we'll try again. And until you do, I don't know if it's true or not, but I definitely know I can't believe it, because your argument is broken. And so I would say that the use of informal logic is an instant portal wormhole technology, because it's just okay. I've got my answer. I analyzed it and I found one logical fallacy. That's all I need. Now I can just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And I represented what you're describing to be informal logic is it's the same as deductive reasoning, from what I understand, because it takes premise A, premise B, and on the basis of that you form a direct conclusion, right? So I see it as a car, right? If you have to reach a friend's house, you can directly you can put your car right in front of the friend's house, and immediately you see your friend. But what if your friend lives, let's say, in India? How do you use your car to reach to India? That is the question, right? You have to reach to India because that is the question that you're trying to answer. How do you do it with a car?
Right. Well, that's why I'm saying you're using a teleporter. Basically, you're just instantly there. You're not using the car anymore. You're using something faster and more robust. You're just instantly
I get the
there.
wormhole analogy, but you cannot see even in informal logic as you described it. You were very close to the conclusion, right? You had a premise. You had premise A. You had premise B, and the conclusion was just right there. You just applied those two together, and you get the answer, right?
Right.
But but reality is often not like that, right? In reality, there are questions which do not have such simple premises, and yet, in order to form a model or an understanding of reality, human beings have done all sorts of reasoning to get here. So what I'm trying to say is that depending on how far the conclusion is, you are going to use different means to get there. That does not mean that because someone has used abductive reasoning, they have the exact right answer. You don't, right?
Well,
you are getting closer to it, at least.
Logic is, of course, limited in a respect. It is a tool, and it relies on observation of reality in the end to decide whether what fallacies, if any, were made. So, although I can construct an argument using formal logic, if I translate it into informal logic, and it sounds right, but something is wrong with it, and I'll give an example in a moment, then we have to be skeptical of the conclusion. So, either my light is on or it is off. That's premise one. Well, okay, that's fair enough. Then I say, well, if lobsters exist, then my light is off. Then the conclusion is, well, therefore my light is off. And you go, wait a minute. Lobsters have nothing to do with your light being on or off, but how do you know that? Well, because, where in reality does that line up? You need another argument now for that to be true, and I'm like, and plus my light is on, it's just right there, we didn't need any argument, we could just look at my light. So there's a limit to it, and so then we have a different methodology, which is, we call science, where we say, hey, is that a light? Yeah, it is. So is it on? Yeah, sure is. Okay, can we test that? Sure, we can get all sorts of devices to test whether it's a light or not, And so we have another methodology at our disposal called the methods of science. So I think science plus informal logic is, as far as I know, the best way to know what is real. And when dealing with, but what if I believe in something that I can't verify? I go, well, why would you believe in something you can't verify? Why would you believe in something you can't test? And then you get these sort of bad arguments that I've heard many, many times. It's like, what's a spirit or a soul? What is the afterlife? What is this supernatural? What is God? What are these things that you're talking about? But more importantly, how do you know that those things are what you say that what you said they are? And so what's your methodology to determine that?
So let me just say something. So when you are saying that we have two things that we can do, we can either apply informal logic or deductive reasoning, or we can apply science, which is testable phenomena, right? These are the two things that you're saying. I say science actually comes under the category of reasoning itself, because in science you are inherently using inductive reasoning. You see observation happening, you see a pattern forming, and then you infer that this pattern is always going to continue. For example, I see that 100 people over the course of 10 years go into a gym, they do this, and over a period of time, they build muscle, right? I might not know what is going on inside the body, what reaction is going on from that. But when the 101th a person will come, science will beat its chest and be like, yes, you will build muscle because we have observed it. Bro, you are using inductive reasoning, you're not using deductive reasoning, right? That is all of what science is. Science ends at inductive reasoning of sorts. Sometimes it goes into deductive reasoning, but for most phenomena, most complex phenomena, we're always making correlations and associations on the basis of patterns that we see in nature. So science itself is not hard logic, it is soft logic because it is using inductive reasoning. And
no, because you have data, you collect the data.
What is data?
It depends on what we're...
Data is repeated patterns, right?
Yeah.
Keep seeing those patterns again and again,
right.
And therefore you assume just because they've happened 110 million times that it is going
right.
to happen one more time. That
right.
is still inductive reasoning. It's still
right.
assuming. You don't know whether or not that ends right there. So even science is not hard logic. It is not premise A, premise B forming a conclusion. Science is soft logic.
Well, but
and
no, because you're also setting aside mathematics, which is a science of sorts. So, we wouldn't be able to speak as we are without these computers, and these computers are the result of science. So it certainly is something that...
Science doesn't work. I was simply saying that science is not using direct logic of sorts. It is seeing patterns and it is putting them together to assume that certain things are going to happen.
Not an assumption. Not really.
It is an assumption. Of course, if I am seeing 4 apples lined up and I assume there is going to be a 5th apple, you're going to say it's a big assumption. If I see 1 million apples lined up and I assume there is going to be a 1,000,001th apple,
but that's not how science works. That's not science.
That's literally how science works. If you say it is testable, if it is repeatable, what does repeatable mean?
Right, that's what I'm saying. If it's testable and repeatable, but your analogy isn't that. And that's the problem with analogies, is they can only get you so far. And so I think that...
asking you, what is scientific criteria if not inductive reasoning? If it is not an assumption?
No, it's more than that. Because because you have the data, and you have the observations, and you have the testing.
Observations, data, and tests, are those all not just identifying patterns and assuming?
No, because you observe X, you write about X, and you have somebody else observe and write down something, and you all compare notes, and you go, hey, did we all look at different stuff, or we all look at the same thing? Okay, well, it looks like we all looked at the same thing.
So it's democratic. If five people exist in the world and they all agree, I see blue, this is definitely blue. It's not simply me looking at it and observing it, seeing a pattern and assuming it is blue.
And not just humans, but also we try to take ourselves as much as we can out of that by having machines that can test what the blue is. And so we can go, okay, when that thing that we've labeled blue emits this pattern, and so if we identify that pattern, we can see, hey, that thing, when we shined a light on it, the detector said it was blue, and so now we can know that it is detecting that it's blue and that we're not all being fooled by our eyeballs. But again, it's all empirical. It's all there for real. And so that's what we need. We need evidence. And so evidence is the observation, not just observations, but testing and retesting. And whether you want to call it assumption or not, whatever.
You're going to have a field day with this one. Just Google what the word empirical means. See the first definition that pops up.
Well, that's an appeal to definition.
Fine, just look it up.
No, that'd be your burden.
Sure. So it says that empirical means based on, concerned with, or verifiable by observation or experience rather than theory or pure logic.